Whiskey wasn't the only reason a cowboy would push through the doors of a saloon. Behind the bar, pots were bubbling with dishes that would make any outsider raise an eyebrow. Bull testicles sizzling in hot oil, sourdough flapjacks packed into saddlebags for long rides, and thick stews thrown together with whatever was on hand. In this video, you'll discover 25 authentic dishes that once lit up the dusty tables of the Old West, and that almost no one remembers today. Number 1. The Bravery Pot. In the shadow of the saloons that dotted the frontier, a rising steam signaled dinner time. The stew, known among cowboys as the Bravery Pot, wasn't open to questions. It demanded guts. Waste was defeat. Offal that would never make it onto a fancy menu. Heart, liver, intestines, marrow, gizzard, and brain went straight into the pot, along with potatoes, onions, and handfuls of herbs pulled from the dry ground. Pepper hung in the air, triggering coughs and laughter, while trail stories surfaced to draw curious folks to the fire. Every spoonful reminded the men in the saddle that the journey didn't forgive weakness. The broth, thick enough to cling to the spoon, gave back the energy drained by days under a ruthless sun. Finishing the bowl wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual. At that makeshift table, toughness was measured by the empty bottom of the bowl, not by how quick you were on the draw. Whoever scraped the sides clean earned a respectful nod and sometimes an invite to the next cattle drive. Out of that cast iron pot came more than food. It brought the certainty that, on the edge of civilization, fire and brotherhood were enough to keep you moving forward. Number 2. The weight of the sour pancake. Before diners became a must-stop on the road, cowboys relied on a bubbling jar of starter tied to the saddle. The cook treated that sourdough like treasure. He'd mix in water, flour, and salt, pour the batter onto a lard-greased griddle, and let the fire work its magic. Crisp edges and a chewy center. The tangy smell gave away its age, weeks, even months of fermenting. And one bite proved the legend. Dense discs that sank in your gut but kept you going through long rides or a sudden showdown. Sugar didn't make the cut. Any sweetness came after, if you were lucky, in a drizzle of molasses, a ladle of grease, or some syrupy fruit that rolled in by train to the towns with tracks. Served at sunrise in the heat of noon, or when the moon had already passed overhead, those pancakes set the pace of the trail. Whoever grabbed the last flip got to scrape the bottom of the pot and maybe score an extra spoonful of syrup. Between crackling wood and the jingle of spurs, every bite told a survival story still glowing in the campfire's embers. Number 3. Full belly at the saloon counter. At the heart of the cattle trails, a steady smell drifted from the smoky saloon kitchens, thick slices of salt pork sizzling in their own fat. After months packed in brine barrels, the meat stood up to dust, heat, and the lack of ice. On the griddle, it browned fast, dropping crispy bits that ran down into beans slowly simmering in big cast iron pots. Whether pinto or navy, the beans soaked up every drop of grease and sometimes got a splash of molasses, onions, or extra lard. If the supply train had been kind that week, just add a slab of aged sourdough or a thick piece of cornbread, and it all turned into fuel that kept a cowboy going from sunup to sundown. Many saloons kept the pot bubbling day and night, ready to serve anyone who came in covered in sweat and dust, needing to fill their belly before taking a swig of the cheapest whiskey around. Number 4. Embers in a can. Known as six-shooter coffee, the chuck wagon brew fueled every mile of the cattle drive. Before the horizon even lit up, the cook would hang a dented can over hot coals. Once the water boiled, he'd toss in handfuls of grounds as dark as the night. The smell drifted across the plains and dragged cowboys out from under their ponchos. To sink the grounds, anything went. Eggshells, crushed beans, a strip of rawhide, or just a pinch of salt. The result came out thick, bitter, and strong enough to wake up a tired horse. In saloons, a black pot boiled all day long. Just drop a coin or a sliver of gold on the counter, and you'd get a steaming mug, good for sparking conversation or killing a hangover. Men drank it before breakfast after poker, and sometimes instead of sleeping. When luck was on their side, a splash of whiskey cut through the harsh taste and gave them the kick they needed for the next stretch of trail. Number 5. Crunch of courage on the plains. On the dusty counters of bars scattered across Colorado, Wyoming, and Texas, there was a snack that separated curious tourists from real cowboys. They called it Prairie oysters, a playful name for an ingredient that had never seen the ocean. Bull testicles, freshly removed during spring castrations, a key part of cattle work. Nothing went to waste. Every part of the animal became sustenance, and this often overlooked piece earned its place as a culinary trophy. The process was exact. Clean them, slice them into rounds, coat them in flour seasoned with coarse salt, black pepper, and paprika. Within seconds, the slices hit the hot lard, rising golden and crispy. The sizzle alone drew a crowd, but the real show began when the waiter crossed the saloon with a steaming platter. One whiff of that toasted aroma was enough to spark bets and dares. Anyone who turned down a bite became the butt of jokes for the rest of the night. Hot sauce, sharp vinegar, or spicy mustard amped up the flavor, while long pulls of beer or rye whiskey helped tame the heat. Between laughter and the creak of spurs, biting into that crust was a way of claiming the plains as your own, a sign of grit, respect for hard work, and pride in a land that doesn't believe in waste. To this day, at cattle branding festivals, the tradition lives on, reminding folks that some stories are told in the language of fire and the crackle of a perfect fry. Number 6. Flavor hunt, rabbit stew. When cattle were scarce and beef prices shot up, rabbit became the go-to game. Quick, lean, and plenty around, it landed in the pots swinging from wagons or steaming in saloons. First, the meat got seared in hot lard. Then it was dropped into a thick broth with potatoes, onions, and carrots pulled from barrels. As the route shifted, the cook added whatever he came across. A forgotten turnip, a bitter herb picked at dawn, or dried chilies, cumin, and garlic shared by Hispanic cowboys in New Mexico. Hours over low heat blended flavors and stories, turning out a hearty stew that, with every spoonful, brought a tired cowboy a taste of some far-off backyard. It wasn't fancy. It was liquid grit, an invitation to keep riding toward the next horizon. Number 7. Feast behind the saloon. In the walnut-covered towns between Missouri and Arkansas, cattle prices went up, but folks still wanted to eat. The solution moved through the trees. Squirrel, cheap and everywhere, quickly became the star of a fricassee borrowed from European kitchens. First, the pieces were lightly fried, then simmered in their own broth, thickened with flour and milk. The sauce, rich and slightly spicy, soaked into the tender meat and rained down over fresh-baked biscuits or cornbread. Nobody wrote it on the sign out front, but just step through the back door and you'd hear the clatter of pans and smell the aroma that gave away a shared survival secret. In those saloons, whiskey made room for a kitchen that could turn any catch into comfort. Number 8. Corn dodgers, trail bread. When yeast ran low, corn took over. Just mix cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt, and, if you had it, a touch of lard to make a thick dough shaped into little torpedoes. On hot rocks or a camp skillet, they'd form a toasted crust that filled the air with a warm smell. In saloons, they showed up drizzled with molasses. Out on the trail, they rode in saddlebags, staying good for days. Biting into a corn dodger meant hearing the crunch of grains and tasting the slight smoky sweetness that brought the night fire to mind. Many cowboys slept with one tucked in their bandana, ready to warm up alongside the morning coffee. For them, it was the frontier's hamburger. Quick, familiar, and tough, just like the riders themselves. Number 9. Protein in a jar. On the dusty counters of saloons, a glass jar full of pale eggs wasn't for decoration. It was a cowboy's lightning-fast meal. These seasoned orbs were portable protein bombs, ready to kill hunger without breaking up the conversation. If you were low on cash or rushing between rounds, you'd grab a boiled egg, cured for days in a brine of vinegar, salt, mustard seeds, peppercorns, garlic, and sometimes beet or fresh chili, which dyed the whites and kicked up the flavor. After that soak, the yolk picked up tang and heat. No silverware needed. A customer would crack the shell on the counter, peel it in seconds, and swallow it whole, chasing it with a swig of beer or whiskey. It only cost a few cents, but it reeled folks right into the next round. Number 10. Crunchy comfort. After days on the dusty plains, a cowboy chewed on hardtack. Flour, water, and salt crackers, dry as a rock and nearly indestructible. At the first saloon along the way, that same disc got smashed into bits, soaked in water or broth, and covered in a bubbling gravy made from pork fat, flour, and pepper. When the pot allowed, chopped onions or bits of bacon were tossed in, filling the air with a mouth-watering smell. Every bite gave the traveler a taste of a real table again, a reminder that a little bit of civilization could fit inside a steaming bowl. Number 11. Hump on the coals. When the rails cut through the prairies, it was the bison that ruled the horizon. Endless herds marched under the sun, while saloons near the tracks turned that abundance into a star dish. The most prized cut came from the hump, firm on the outside, slowly giving in to the heat of iron ovens or open-fire spits. The fat melted, dripping down over the meat, carrying salt and herbs into every fiber. All it took was slicing it up, drizzling it with its own juices and adding potatoes. And miners would pay more for it than for beef. The value didn't come from rarity, but from status. Tasting that roast was a stamp of arrival in the West. That hunger for prestige, though, would soon shrink herds that once seemed endless, turning the bison and its flavor into both an icon and a warning of the frontier. Number 12. Sweetness that sustains. When meat got tiresome and pockets were empty, the camp turned to a simple trick. Dough made of flour, lard, a pinch of salt, and a splash of water or sour milk. Shaped in a hurry, it went into the Dutch oven or straight onto the griddle, forming light layers under a firm crust. As soon as one batch came out piping hot, the cook had the next one lined up. Nobody wanted to miss out. Over each biscuit, a thick stream of molasses would drip down. A precious stash thanks to its shelf life and the energy it gave back to tired legs. The first bite brought back memories of a front porch down south, and that alone was enough to get a cowboy back in the saddle. Even in saloons, when there wasn't any pie, it was this combo that kept the talk going until the next creak of the swinging doors. Number 13. Fried grit on the frontier. In the Old West, no part of the calf went to waste, not even the brain. As soon as the animal was butchered, saloon cooks would dip thin slices in batter and drop them into hot oil until they came out with a crispy shell. The first bite mixed crunch and cream, with a mild flavor that reminded folks of eggs. The smell drifted right through swinging doors, calling in travelers low on cash for a cheap, hearty, and energizing plate. Towns shaped by German, French, and Mexican hands embraced the recipe and served it proudly, pairing it with mustard, golden onions, or hot sauce. Before long, versions like brain breakfast showed up, brains mixed with eggs and bread before sunrise. For cowboys, the rule was simple. If it sizzled in the pan, it was worth every bite. Number 14. Ember and dust, the Jerky Odyssey. There wasn't a trail or saloon that escaped the smoky scent of deer, elk, or antelope strips hanging behind the counter. Hunters came back from the woods with these brown ribbons, cured under the punishing sun, coarse salt, and slow-burning embers, and quickly turned them into currency. The saloon owner paid in dollars, drinks, or even favors to keep his customers stocked. Anyone sitting at the bar who bit into that tough meat found more than just food. Each fiber held the sound of hooves on loose dirt, the crackle of firewood, the scrape of a knife. Black pepper, red chili flakes, and a hint of sage or juniper cut through the salt and lit up the taste buds, pairing perfectly with a sip of rye or the cold foam of a beer. It was food that didn't need fire or haste. It lasted for days in the saddle, weeks in a saddlebag, and that's why it became the first real bar snack, long before pretzels or peanuts. Some saloons even turned it into a ritual. They served boards with thin slices, sour pickles, and cheese shavings, a silent invite for the next drink and, of course, the next story. Anyone carrying jerky wore a badge of self-reliance. They hunted it, prepped it, traveled light, and wherever they stopped, they were met with respect. This was someone who knew how to feed themselves. In the West, few things spoke louder than that dried-out strip of meat. tough as the dusty roads and steady as the will of anyone chasing the next horizon. Number 15. Oven and Dust, the Prospector's Pie. In the dust-covered towns where the gold rush ended at the saloon counter, cooks had to feed worn-out men without wasting time or money. That's how the Prospector's Pie was born, an early version of the comfort food that would later take over American tables. Chunks of beef, rabbit, or even squirrel went into the pot with onions and hearty root vegetables. From there came a thick stew that, when flour was on hand, got a bed of flaky crust at the bottom of the pan. Or on leaner days, just a biscuit top that browned as it baked. The community oven, tucked behind the saloon or next to the blacksmith's forge, turned out a steaming pie whose smell drifted across the street and drew customers like a church bell. Served in big slices or handed out in dented tins, sided with pickles or yesterday's beans, it gave a sweat-soaked prospector a brief taste of home. And as the gravy ran from that first bite, it felt like the whole desert took a break. Number 16. Trail Fuel, Cornmeal Polenta, sizzling on the grill. Long before grits showed up on southern counters, this cornmeal polenta was what kept folks going on the frontier. Saloons that lived off frugal cowboys and railroad crews swore by it. The prep followed a stubborn rhythm. Cornmeal mixed with water or milk, slow heat, and non-stop stirring until the cream thickened with weight. Then the mix was poured into a tin mold, left to cool and firm up into a solid block. Next came the wide knife, slicing it into thick slabs that hit hot iron until a golden crust formed and sang at the touch of a fork. Some would drizzle on molasses or sorghum, but plenty preferred the savory route, drenched in melted beef tallow and sprinkled with coarse salt and black pepper. No city flair here, just straight-up heat, texture that hugged you, and fat that shut your stomach up after a day on horseback or pounding the rails. A dish that fit in your pocket and gave you the breath to push through another 1,000 miles of dust. Number 17. Hunt and Comfort, Turkey with Dumplings. When beef prices soared and buffalo vanished from the horizon, saloons nestled among pine trees turned to what the forests had to offer. Out of that need came wild turkey with dumplings, a humble-looking dish that drew in tired cowboys and focused gamblers alike. The bird, hunted at dawn, was dropped into a long boil that tamed its tough meat. Once shredded, it went back into a thick broth boosted with herbs, onions, garlic, and pepper, its aroma drifting through doorways and bringing the saloon to a hush. Near the end, rough-cut flour dumplings were tossed in. They puffed up fast like storm clouds before the rain, soaking in the steaming flavor of the game. Every spoonful brought back memories of Sunday dinner at the family table, and it wasn't uncommon to see cards set aside by a gambler eager for the next bite. Number 18. Gold in Apple Slices. In the Old West, fresh fruit was a reason to celebrate, but dried apples were worth their weight in gold. They traveled by wagon or rattling rail cars, packed tight in sacks that crossed deserts. When they reached the saloons, they were brought back to life, soaked in water until their sleepy scent returned. Then came cinnamon, nutmeg, and sugar, building a thick filling that bubbled in cast-iron pots. The crust, a mix of flour, lard, and water, was rolled out thick to handle the rough heat. Some pies got a lid, others let that golden center shine. This wasn't some dainty dessert. It was firm, heavy, and made to ride side by side with a cowboy. One bite of that moist, slightly tart and smoky core could send you flashing back to the orchards you left behind. A slice cost just a few cents, but on a freezing night, it could be worth more than a shot of whiskey. Number 19. Trail Bread, Johnny Cakes. Griddles sizzling, the smell of toasted corn, and a rush at the counter. That's how Johnny Cakes came to life. Cornmeal discs that spanned generations. Born over indigenous campfires and quickly adopted by settlers, they became the bread of the frontier. The recipe fit in the palm of your hand. Cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt. The batter hit the griddle, curled at the edges like a cowboy hat, and turned golden in seconds. Served plain or with a drizzle of sorghum, they held up stews and beans, and sometimes doubled as edible utensils. They stood up to trail dust, didn't crumble, and filled saddlebags without spoiling. All it took was open flame and a spatula to churn out dozens, making them the go-to order for rowdy customers. Out on the trail, they were pancake fuel. In saloons, just ask for hot and ready, and with every bite, you could feel history grinding between your teeth. Number 20. Prime cut of the Old West. On the dusty saloon counters, beef tongue was the jewel reserved for loyal customers. It was a silent invitation to patience. Anyone who wanted a taste had to watch the clock tick slow. After hours simmering in a fragrant broth of onions and spices, the hot cut was peeled, sliced, and seared in a skillet. The bits stuck to the bottom turned into a thick brown gravy, brought to life with a handful of flour, wrapping each slice like a firm coat. The plate hit the table alongside soft potatoes, fresh-baked cornbread, or apple rings browned in bacon fat. Its silky texture and deep flavor made tired cowboys, anxious gamblers, and proud sheriffs all pause for a deep breath before that first bite. Whoever scored the last portion guarded their plate with an arm, knowing that prize wasn't going to be shared. Number 21. Bowl of Fire Trail Chili. Before shelves were lined with canned tomatoes, frontier cowboys powered through dry journeys with a hearty stew of pinto beans, dried chilies, and chunks of meat seared in their own tallow. The beans soaked overnight, the meat hit hot iron, and before sunrise everything bubbled in a kettle, sending up smoke and the promise of energy. Behind its simplicity, every ranch hand had a secret: wild garlic yanked from the trail's edge, tiny onions, or a splash of coffee that darkened the broth and kept the night watch sharp. Others stuck to the bare essentials: meat, beans, heat, trusting the fire to tell the rest of the story. Some dared to add ground pasilla or slivers of dried anchovy, swearing it could wake a tired horse. In saloons, the dish became legend, billed as the red bowl that bites back, served steaming with a hunk of sourdough or just a beaten-up spoon. Ask for it mild and you'd get a laugh. Be bold and find out how far your taste buds can ride. Number 22. Echoes from the Stove Whiskey Bread Pudding. In the dusty saloons of the West, not every traveler came looking for a strong drink. Many followed the sweet smell drifting from the kitchen. There, dried-out bread chunks, forgotten biscuits, and leftover cornbread got a second chance. Soaked in milk, sugar, and eggs, they rested for a bit before hitting the heat of the oven, where they turned into a creamy base with a golden crust that cracked under a spoon. To catch the eye, the cook would melt butter, sugar, and a generous pour of whiskey, heat it till it bubbled, and let it drip over each steaming slice. Raisins popped up like little nuggets. Sometimes apple chunks added a fresh surprise. When this dish hit the counter, it meant someone cared. It reminded riders who'd been on the trail for days that even on the roughest roads, there was still room for comfort. Number 23. Crispy Creek Trout. Climbing into the hills always came with a surprise. In saloons nailed to the riverbanks, cooks would lift still shimmering trout from buckets and toss them into coarse cornmeal mixed with black pepper. The fish got a coating that, once it hit the hot lard, turned into a golden, crackling crust that lured cowboys by sound alone. While a steak demanded hours over the coals, fish was ready in minutes, just in time for the stagecoach to unload eastern travelers craving something lighter than jerky. The platter came whole, head and bones included, sided with pickled onions or tender potatoes. For folks who'd spent weeks chewing on beans, every bite felt like a feast, even if it was served on a tin plate. And with the crunch of that first bite, everyone was reminded that a little luxury could come from a rush and an early morning catch. Number 24. Crimson Heart of the West. In the dusty corners of saloons, wild currants were a ruby-red treasure picked from the hillsides. Brought to a boil with sugar, they turned into a glossy syrup that bubbled in cast-iron pots, filling the air with an almost hypnotic scent. Over that scarlet pool, spoonfuls of thick dough became golden islands, ready to soak up the tart juice creeping around the edges. Just stepping through the wooden door was enough to catch the scent, and cowboys left the trail dust behind. Some asked for a cloud of fresh cream, others swore a light dusting of sugar was all it needed, but everyone agreed. Each bite revealed the contrast that defined the West. wild sharpness wrapped in softness, a living memory of sunlit days spent gathering freely. Number 25. Griddled pork bread. On cold Old West mornings, the smell of a golden bubbling block pulled half-asleep cowboys toward the fire. Called Scrapple, the dish was born on mid-Atlantic farms, where Pennsylvania Dutch settlers learned to turn every part of the pig into something useful. Offal, meat, and fat were cooked down with cornmeal and spices, poured into a mold, and left to set until firm. At dawn, the block was sliced and thrown onto a hot griddle, the outside crisped up while the center stayed soft enough to keep hunger away for hours. On saloon counters, those needing an extra boost topped it with molasses, mustard, or a fried egg. More than a meal, it was a reminder that nothing goes to waste when the road is long and the winter hits hard. Yes, these 25 recipes made a name for themselves in the saloons, which were far more than just whiskey counters. They were the cowboys' safe haven amid dust, gunfire, and endless roads. Some dishes were bold, others downright simple, but everyone carried a story. If you're feeling hungry for the Old West, subscribe and hit the bell. Tell us in the comments which dish you'd be willing to try or steer clear of. Grab the reins and click here. The next video is already on the horizon.